What if I told you that there was a man who danced across England over the course of a few weeks because someone bet him that he couldn't do it and he wanted to prove them wrong? Today we're talking about William Kempe. Not much is known about when he was born or his parentage, but the opinion is generally that he was born around 1560 in Kent and he died in 1603 of the plague. He was an English actor and dancer known as Shakespeare's clown. He played a bumbling police constable named Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing, and an illiterate and tone-deaf servant named Peter in Romeo and Juliet. While Kempe mainly acted in comedies, he was best known for being one of the original actors in William Shakespeare's dramas. He was famous for performing jigs and using physical comedy that incorporated dance. Sometimes he would do these things at the end of a tragic play, which many critics complained that it ruined the mood. The first record we have of Kempe's acting career is in 1585 with Leicester's Men. Leicester's Men was a play company in English theatre owned by Robert Dudley. They were mainly active in the 1570s and 1580s during Queen Elizabeth I's reign and toured Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. In 1592, Kempe became one of Lord Strange's Men, which was another play company in England. He was only with them for 2 years, and in 1594, he joined the Lord Chamberlain's Men, which was Shakespeare's play company. He was also a shareholder in the Globe Theatre, where Shakespeare's plays were performed. In early 1599, Kempe had some sort of disagreement with Shakespeare's company, and he was removed from it. He resigned his shares in the Globe Theatre and left. And it's probably for the best because it caught fire in 1613 during a performance of Henry VIII. A theatrical cannon was set off during the performance, but it misfired and ignited the wooden beams and the building was destroyed. No one was hurt except one man whose breeches caught on fire, but don't worry, they put out the fire with ale. The Globe Theatre was rebuilt the following year. So Kempe was no longer part of Shakespeare's company, but he had a passion for performing, and also for money. Some people had bet that Kempe could not Morris dance his way from London to Norwich, a distance of over 100 miles, or 161 kilometers. So in early 1600, he set out to prove them wrong. Now you're probably thinking, what the heck is Morris dancing? Well, it's a form of English folk dance, which is characterized by rhythmic stepping. It almost resembles Irish dancing or a jig, which is something that Kempe was famous for. The dancers would traditionally wear bell pads on their shins, which would make noise, and would use something like a stick, sword, or handkerchief that they would clap together to match the dancing or the music. The earliest record we have of Morris dance is 1448 by the Goldsmiths Company in London. And to this day, there are still teams and companies all over the world that perform Morris dancing. Where it got its name from is not entirely clear. However, it is thought that it was a play on the Moors, which refers to the Muslim inhabitants in southwestern Europe and northern Africa during the Middle Ages. The implements used, like the sticks, swords, and handkerchiefs and bells, were supposed to be a symbol of the Moors' culture. William Kempe named his tour 9 Days Wonder, and he wrote a little book that describes his journey. He talks about the towns he visited, the people he met, and even some dares that he carried out, like jumping over a churchyard wall. He had a few of the betters accompany him, but along the way, 2 of them were apprehended for stealing a purse. He also had a man named George Spratt come along to make sure he didn't cheat. He took along his tabor player, Thomas Sly, because he needed some music to dance to, and his servant, William B., because reasons. His book makes it sound like it took him 9 consecutive days to dance from London to Norwich, but in reality, it took him 9 days spread over several weeks. So he did 9 actual days of dancing, with several days of rest in between. There is some difference of opinion of when his journey actually started, so we're just going to go with the most widely accepted theory. He left on, and I quote, the first Monday of Clean Lent, which just means that he left on the first Monday of Lent, which in 1599 was February 21st. He began at the Lord Mayor's house in London. He was greeted by a large crowd who saw him off that day. The crowd came equipped with coins, creams, and cakes, and they were ready to celebrate, or to watch him fall flat on his face. A lot of people thought he would give up, but he was determined to prove them wrong. He traveled 13 miles the first day and stopped in Romford. But it seemed to take its toll on him because he rode a horse into town and spent 2 days there recuperating. On Thursday, he rode back to where he had stopped to continue dancing, but ended up hurting his hip. Instead of seeing a doctor, he decided to dance the pain away, and off he went, dancing 6 miles to Burntwood. It is here that he attempted to escape the crowds, but claimed he still had an audience of about 50, and he spent the night in Ingerstone. On Friday, Kempe left for Chelmsford. He was greeted by yet another crowd. Kempe claims that the audience was so excited and enthusiastic that it took him an hour to pass through the gate of the inn where he planned to stay. He describes himself almost as if he were one of the Beatles during Beatlemania, and the crowd was like millions of screaming fans and paparazzi. He got to his room at the inn, locked himself in, and spoke to the crowd through a window. The next morning, a Saturday, he danced 3 miles, or 4.8 kilometers, but was so exhausted that he had to return to Chelmsford to rest. He stayed there for 2 days, and while he was there, he danced with a 14-year-old girl who was a servant of a friend of his. He gave the girl some bells, and they danced together for an hour in a large room. Then we enter week 2. On Monday, Kempe rode the 3 miles that he had danced 2 days prior. The road was narrow, it was full of water and mud that was up to his ankles, so needless to say, it was not very dance-friendly. In fact, 2 young locals wanted to dance with him, but when one of them took the first leap, he became stuck in the mud, and the other young local had to pull him out. Kempe carried on and arrived in Braintree by noon. The next day was Tuesday, and he danced 3 miles again. However, he doesn't say where he stayed that night. On Wednesday, he reached the town of Sudbury. When he arrived, a strong, tall butcher offered to keep him company by dancing alongside him to Bury. Kempe accepted, and off they went. However, the butcher gave up about half a mile in, stating that he could not keep up with Kempe even for 100 pounds. As the butcher left, a young woman shouted that she could keep going for a mile even if it cost her her life. The crowd burst out in laughter, but she said if Kempe lent her some bells, she would dance with him for a mile. Kempe agreed, and off they went. To everyone's surprise, the woman was able to keep up with Kempe for a whole mile. As a reward, he gave her a crown piece to buy a drink. Kempe referred to her as my merry maid Marian. He then arrived in Melford, where he stayed for a few days, and was given his own entertainment by a gentleman named Master Colt. Off he went again on Saturday, this time with Master Colt joining him. Kempe wrote that he wanted to shorten his journey to Bury by going through Clare, and Master Colt encouraged this detour. However, looking at a map shows that Clare is not on the way to Bury, but in fact it's almost in the opposite direction of where he wanted to end up in Norwich. Norwich is northeast and Clare is to the west. It is thought that Master Colt misdirected Kempe for his own amusement. Kempe did not realize until he reached Clare that he was 6 miles off course. He angrily made his way back to Melford by horse and then carried on to Bury by foot. There was such heavy snowfall in Bury that he was stuck there for 5 days. The next dance was on Friday, his destination, Thetford. He rested there for the weekend and had some more entertainment. A few days later, on Monday, he left for Rockland. He stayed at an inn there and headed for Hingham the next day. He was almost at his destination. The final day, a Wednesday, he made it near Norwich. He rode into town on horseback and met with the mayor, Roger Weld. Kempe and the mayor decided that Kempe would rest for a few days, ride out of Norwich, and then he would dance his way back in so he could make a spectacular entrance. So on that day, a Saturday, there was a large crowd patiently waiting for Kempe's arrival. As he danced in and prepared to make his grand entrance, the crowd was so enthusiastic and eager to see him that they caused Kempe to step on a girl's skirt, which pulled it off. So his amazing and famous trip ended not with him stealing the show and being the center of attention, but rather with him pantsing a young girl in front of a large crowd. The dance ended at the Guildhall in Norwich, where his shoes were nailed to a wall. So Kempe won the bet. But here's the catch. We aren't completely sure that this story is even true, as Kempe has told it. Kempe wrote this book after the fact, so his memory was probably not the greatest at the time. Also, it has been suggested that he was an alcoholic, so he may have had to fill in the gaps of his stories because of that. Not to mention, some of his details are incorrect or missing. For instance, he fails to say where he stayed on a few occasions, and when writing about his final week, he mistakes it for the second week. It's important to remember that Kempe was not a writer, though. He was a performer, and maybe that can explain some of the missing details or out-of-sequence events, but regardless, it is a fantastic story, and I, for one, hope that every bit of it is real.